At 32, I've often wondered why I never felt the urgency to settle down. I've had offers, of course. Men who admired my beauty, who turned their heads when I walked by, eager to spend their days with me. But for all their attention, I never felt intrigued enough by any of them. It wasn't that I didn't want love or companionship, but something deeper was missing. Perhaps it was because I couldn't find anyone who stirred my soul, who made me want to surrender my independence for a lifetime of shared moments. It's strange, though. Sometimes when you least expect it, life presents you with moments you never imagined. That morning, the light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long, soft shadows across the room. It was peaceful, and I had just settled down with my first cup of coffee, savoring the quiet that comes with early mornings, when a knock echoed through the house. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I rarely had visitors, especially at this hour. Placing the cup down, I stood, curiosity pulling me towards the door. When I opened it, there stood Mr. Ellis. He was my neighbor from across the street, and in all the years I had known him, I had never seen him quite like this. His tall frame seemed to carry more weight than usual, not in his physicality, but in the way his shoulders drooped, as if the invisible burdens he had been carrying were suddenly too much. His once sharp eyes were dulled, shadowed with something deeper than just age. The lines on his face, though once proud and defined, now looked softened by grief. He was in his early 50s, still strong, still capable, but there was an undeniable awareness about him that hadn't been there before. I knew about the tragedy that had struck him a year ago. His wife, a woman who had been the center of his world, had passed away suddenly. And since then, Mr. Ellis had changed. His children, both grown and living in different cities, rarely visited. They came for the funeral and occasionally sent postcards or called during the holidays, but for the most part, they had lives of their own, leaving him in that large, empty house. He had always been an involved father and a loving husband, and losing the family life he had built over decades had drained something out of him. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," I said, stepping back to let him in. "Please come in." He gave a slight nod, his expression tired, almost apologetic, as though he felt he was imposing just by being there. I could sense something different today. We had exchanged pleasantries in the past, passing conversations about the weather or the occasional comment about his garden, but nothing more. Today, though, there was a depth in his eyes that hadn't been there before, and I knew something had brought him to my door that he hadn't been able to express before. I led him into the living room, gesturing for him to sit on the couch. As he settled in, I noticed the way he moved slowly, as if even sitting down took more effort than it should. His hands rested on his knees, clasped together, his eyes downcast. "How have you been?" I asked, my voice soft. I wanted to ease him into the conversation, sensing that whatever he was about to say wasn't going to come easily. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with a weight that seemed unbearable. When he finally looked up at me, the sadness in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "I'm managing," he said, his voice low, almost as though he was afraid to let it break. I nodded, unsure of what to say next. How do you ask someone who has lost everything they loved how they're doing? It seemed like such an impossible question to answer. "And the kids?" I asked, trying to offer him a safe way into the conversation. "They're fine," he said, his gaze dropping again. "Busy with their lives. They've moved on in a way that I haven't, I suppose." There was a long pause, the silence stretching out between us like an unspoken truth. I could feel the tension in the room, the way the air seemed to thicken as his loneliness became almost palpable. It filled the space, pressing in on both of us. I didn't push him. I let the quiet settle, knowing that he would speak when he was ready. And he did. "I'm tired," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tired of the silence. Tired of waking up in an empty house." I thought I could handle it. After all, I had always been strong for my family. But now... He trailed off, and I could see the struggle in his eyes, the way he was trying to hold back the flood of emotions that were threatening to overwhelm him. "I've always said that my heart belonged to my wife," he continued, his voice trembling slightly, "that no one could take her place. And that's still true. But the loneliness... I could feel my heart ache for him. I knew what it was like to be lonely. but I couldn't imagine the depth of his solitude. He had spent decades with one person, and then suddenly, she was gone. The person he had shared every moment with, raised children with, built a life with, gone. And now he was left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense without her. "I don't know what I'm asking for," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But I can't keep going like this. This silence, it's unbearable." I felt my throat tighten. I didn't know what to say, but before I could even gather my thoughts, he looked up at me. His eyes filled with an intensity that took my breath away. "Do you think we could be more than friends?" he asked softly, the vulnerability in his voice so raw that it made my heart skip a beat. His words hung in the air, suspended between us like a fragile thread. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't even considered the possibility before, but now standing here in front of him with his eyes searching mine for some kind of answer, I was filled with a mix of confusion and curiosity. I hesitated, my mind racing. Could I really cross that line? Could I be that person for him? Part of me wanted to say no, to let him down gently and send him back home, but another part of me, an unexpected part, felt drawn to him. Maybe it was the loneliness I saw in his eyes, a reflection of my own. Or maybe it was the way he looked at me, as though I was the answer to a question he hadn't dared to ask until now. I don't know, I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've never thought about it before." He gave me a small, sad smile, his shoulders sagging slightly as if he was already bracing for my rejection. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft. "You don't have to feel the same way. I needed to tell you. You're the only person who makes me feel less alone." There was something in his eyes, something vulnerable, something desperate, and in that moment, I realized that I didn't want to send him away. I didn't want to be the reason he went back to that empty house, feeling even more isolated than before. "I don't know what this could be," I said, my words slow, deliberate, but it sounded like something worth the effort. His face softened, his expression shifting from one of despair to something lighter, something hopeful. He stepped forward cautiously, as if testing the waters, and gently placed his hands on my waist. The warmth of his touch surprised me, and I felt a strange sense of comfort wash over me. It had been so long since I had been held like this, since I had felt someone's hands on my body in such a tender way. He leaned in slowly, his lips brushing mine with a gentleness that made my heart flutter. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to sink into the kiss, feeling the soft pressure of his mouth on mine. His touch was tentative, almost hesitant, but as the kiss deepened, I felt something inside me shift. A release, a surrender to the moment. Without thinking, I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him closer, feeling the solid warmth of his body against mine. His hands moved up my back, his touch gentle but steady, as if he was trying to memorize the feel of me beneath his fingers. The kiss grew more passionate, and I could feel the weight of his loneliness in every movement, every touch. As our lips parted briefly, he looked at me, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I don't want to rush you," I nodded, my breath catching in my throat. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm sure." With that, he pulled me closer, his hands moving to the straps of my dress, gently sliding them off my shoulders. The fabric fell away, pulling at my feet, and I stood there, exposed but unafraid. His eyes roamed over my body, not with lust, but with reverence, as though he was seeing something sacred. I felt his eyes on me, not in the way most men looked at me, those fleeting, shallow glances of admiration or desire. No, this was different. There was a reverence in his gaze, a deep appreciation for something more than just my appearance. It was as though, in that moment, he saw all of me, not just the woman standing before him, but the complexities, the loneliness, the need for connection that we both shared. His eyes held mine for what felt like an eternity before he reached for me again, his touch gentle, careful, as though he was still afraid to move too fast, to break whatever fragile understanding we had just found between us. Slowly, I reached for him, my fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the buttons of his shirt. I undid them one by one, my hands moving with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. As the fabric fell away, revealing his chest, I was struck by how vulnerable this moment felt. He was no longer just my neighbor, the man I saw tending his garden or sitting quietly on his porch. He was someone who had lived through great loss, who had felt the deep ache of solitude, just as I had. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting soft shadows across the room. The warmth of the sun brushing against our skin as we stood together, silently exploring each other. I could hear the distant hum of the world outside, the rustling of trees in the gentle breeze, the occasional chirp of a bird. But inside, it was as though time had slowed to a crawl. The room was filled only with the sound of our quiet breaths, the soft rustle of clothing as it fell away, and the steady beating of my heart as I felt his hands on me, moving with the confidence that belied the hesitation I had seen in his eyes. His fingers traced the curve of my back, sending shivers through me, his touch deliberate yet tender. He moved slowly as though savoring every inch of me, every quiet gasp that escaped my lips. I hadn't realized how much I had missed this, the feeling of being touched, of being wanted, of being seen. And not just for my body, but for the person I was beneath it all. When we finally came together, it was as though everything else faded away. The confusion, the uncertainty, the loneliness that had lingered in the background of our lives. His body pressed against mine, warm and solid, and I could feel the years of experience in his every movement. He wasn't hurried or frantic. He was calm, methodical, his touch measured and sure. And yet there was something more, something deeper than just the physical connection we were sharing. It was as though in that moment we were both searching for something: comfort, release, maybe even redemption. His lips moved slowly over mine, his hands tracing familiar paths across my skin, as though he was rediscovering a part of himself that had been lost in the years since his wife had passed. And I, in turn, found myself letting go of the walls I had built around my heart, allowing myself to sink into the moment, to feel everything without the fear of what it might mean. With each thrust, each caress, I felt myself melting into him, our bodies moving together in a rhythm that felt both natural and new. He was gentle, careful, as though he was afraid of breaking me, but I could feel the hunger in his movements, the deep need for connection that we both shared. His hands moved over me with a reverence I hadn't expected, his touch igniting sensations I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't realized how much I had missed this. The closeness, the intimacy, the way two people could communicate without words, their bodies saying everything that needed to be said. I could feel his breath hot against my skin, his fingers trailing down my sides, his lips pressing softly against my neck as we moved together, the tension between us building with every passing second. And then, in a moment of quiet intensity, he reached his peak. I could feel the release in his body, the way his muscles tightened and then relaxed, the way his hands clutched me just a little bit tighter as though he didn't want to let go. His face softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a peace in his expression, a quiet contentment that I hadn't seen since his wife passed. But even as the moment ended, the silence between us lingered, heavy and filled with meaning. We didn't speak. There were no words that could adequately describe what had just happened. It wasn't just about the physical act, it was about something deeper, something unspoken that we had both been searching for. As we lay together, his arm draped over me. I felt a warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the warmth of his body, though that was comforting in its own right. It was the warmth of knowing that for once I wasn't alone, that we weren't alone. He was quiet for a while, his breathing slow and steady, his hand resting gently on my waist as though he was afraid to break the moment. I could feel his heart beating against my back, a steady rhythm that matched the calm that had settled over both of us. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," he said softly, his words carrying more weight than I could have expected. I turned to look at him, our faces inches apart, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope. Not just the fragile hope of a man clinging to the past, but the kind of hope that comes with new beginnings, with the possibility of something more. I smiled softly, reaching up to brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "You don't need to thank me," I whispered back. "We both needed this." He nodded, his eyes searching mine for something I couldn't quite name. There was still so much left unsaid between us, but in that moment, it didn't matter. We had found what we needed: connection, comfort, and the quiet understanding that we didn't have to face the world alone. For a while, we lay there in silence, our bodies still tangled together, the warmth of the morning sun casting a soft glow over us. I could hear the world waking up outside, the distant hum of a car engine, the sound of a bird calling from the trees, but inside, it was as though time had stopped. The room was still, peaceful, and I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't known in a long time. As I lay there, I couldn't help but wonder what this meant for us. What would happen now that we had crossed this line? Would things go back to the way they were? Would we pretend that this never happened? Or would this be the beginning of something new? Something unexpected? I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure I wanted them yet. For now, it was enough to know that I wasn't alone, that we weren't alone. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.